This doesn't have anything to do with what you're.
That's totally fine.
But no, it's different than social media is different than writing, kind of, in that you don't get that instant feedback. Like I put something on my story, walk into class, and after this thing, someone will have something to say about it. I mean, it's usually positive, and it's usually people I know. But like someone will have something to say about it, like now, right?
Yeah.
And like if I publish an article, I don't know what people are doing with that. I mean, you eventually kind of do. Sometimes you'll get like a notice that somebody is teaching it or something. But even that you don't. You can search it. You're like, hey, search your own. Google your own name, and you'll go like, oh wow, my so and so cited me. So and so is teaching me or whatever. But you don't get much feedback on that. So like even if you write something that's considered like, I don't know, important or whatever, you don't really get a lot of feedback on it. You have to just like go and sleuth that out for yourself,
Yeah, well, that's kind of, because I asked about that, I think it was Wednesday, I think it was Emerson, we were waiting.
Oh, you're asking if Whitman knew he was Whitman, right?
Yeah, when did he get that kind of credit?
Yeah.
Like, do you see it?
Yeah.
I wonder, does that change how people write? Do you know?
Well, I mean, I don't know. That's a good question. But like, there's this thing about Blake. Like Blake doesn't know he's Blake, right? Because he got famous, much later when the Romantics discovered him, and Shelley discovered him, and Byron, those guys, and then like, oh, Blake's a thing. But in his lifetime, he was just a crazy artist type, And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't get that kind of recognition in their lifetime, and. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's interesting. Like, I've kind of cooled on him for various reasons that we could talk about it at some point if you wanted to. We don't have to, but like, I like Cormac McCarthy. I've read all of his work, and I've used to be close to a lot of it, and I've never really written anything about him, but he was like a big influence on my writing and my teaching for a long time. But he sort of toiled in obscurity for a long time and just didn't seem to care. He was just like, I'm a writer. My job is to write. It doesn't matter how the world responds to me, And then he got like fantastically famous and well known at a certain point. Like when I first started reading him and was interested in him, there were no books published on him, and
about him or by him?
Yeah, about him.
Okay.
And then there was one. By a guy named Vareem Bell, who was at Vanderbilt, and that was probably like in the late 90s. And now, I could take you to the McCarthy section, and everyone, is writing about him. He's considered like the premier American writer, or he was for a while. I think his star might be fading for various reasons right now. But so, I think that he toiled in obscurity and seemed to be happy with that. And then he got like a rock star famous, and then did it in a slightly different way. I don't really know how to characterize that way. He was still like antisocial and didn't want to do interviews and stuff like that. But he did something like, he had an Oprah interview. So.
Why did he have an effect on your teaching? What about him?
I think just in terms of like teaching his novels and stuff, okay. and like doing, sort of more contemporary stuff. Like the class that we're in, like the early American Lit, that was a class that I was like, or the area I was, hired to teach. And this is a kind of institution where you just, I think I have the record in the department for the most different numbered classes taught. And I probably, like in the last 10 years, I probably haven't, and there are other people here who probably have taught more different number classes than I have, but I've taught a lot of them. I mean, I had a list of them, it was like 23 different classes or something like that. And so, they'd just be like, you need to teach this now. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it, But so like in a lot of schools, I would have never had the chance to teach anything outside of like the area I was hired in necessarily, but here I did. And students like, also the major change in different ways, but like there was more opportunity to teach contemporary stuff. And he was a living writer that students at that point would be interested in. I don't know if they are anymore, but but yeah, so I think that he was somebody that I taught that people were like, they could look out for his next book, or they could be excited about him, or else he was having, some films made of his novels and stuff. So, yeah.
Did you want to come in teaching all those classes, or was it?
No, I mean, so.
No.
Well, I mean, I do. I mean, actually, like teaching is the whole thing for me. Like I care about what I've published and stuff like that, but I'm not super driven to do a lot of new research and stuff right now. And it's always been more about teaching for me.
Why?
Just because I like it. I like this. I like the social dynamic of it. I like to talk to you. Like it's like, let's read a thing and talk about it.
Your style is so funny. It's completely unorthodox.
I don't know if it is. I think it's interesting. Like, in a way, I see it more as old-fashioned.
Really?
Because we used to just like, we were gonna read a thing and then we're gonna go and we're gonna talk about it, and we've kind of moved more away from that. We've moved more towards like this sort of rigidly structured learning, which I think probably works better for some students, but it doesn't really work for me. My goal is not about the class. My goal is about a part of your life. And if you participate in that, then great. And if you don't, that's fine too. You've got your own goals. But like I'm not trying to teach you specific things necessarily about the texts we're reading. I mean, I am, but only as like, I don't know, basically as like methods of learning that you're going to apply to other texts and take into other contexts, and hopefully I'm going to show you different ways to see a thing that's going to stay with you, Does that make sense?
Yeah, are there like specific skills you try and teach that you like plan out at the start? Or is it just kind of like, we're just going to read and see what happens?
Well, no, there are certain basic things like, I don't know, in our class, I don't feel like I'm doing a very good job in our class this semester. I don't have great investment. Like they're, a few of you show up all the time and are ready to go. And I'm not suggesting it's the student's fault. It's probably my fault. But like, I don't know. It's hard to structure things when you have half the class that won't come. And I can force them to come, but then I give up this idea that we're going to just talk about a thing and see what happens. Right?
Have you seen like a decline in participation through attendance and just talking over the years? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
And it's one of my principles to not do like kids these days, because they said it about me, They always, they always say it, right? But yeah, I think that we're experiencing the COVID generation and students who did not have to do the same type of social learning that students have in the past. And I kind of feel like maybe we're getting near the end of it. Sorry, is that you?
That's me.
Well, then I'm not sorry. It's your fault.
I'll be sorry then.
You don't have to be sorry either, but I don't want to be that guy. So yeah, I do think that we're experiencing like students who are less, accustomed, habituated to, adept at social learning, and so I'm a little concerned about that, because I think that our world continues to make things more available to us individually and less interdependent upon each other, and I strongly believe in community as a just foundational principle of not just of learning but of life, and I'm worried about the decline of it, and I try to not be overly, and I try to not be like an old person who's like grouchy about it, but where I see communities continuing to thrive, I see people thriving within them, and where I see people who are not in communities, I see despair, So like I see people in my life who like can work at home and they just have a ever shrinking social circle, and I feel like they are spiritually impoverished from that, and so like if I think about communities that I'm involved in, I see people thriving within those communities, no matter what their age is, no matter what their physical ability is, no matter what their status is, no matter, you know what I mean? So it's like the one thing that like people thrive across all kinds of lines and all kinds of like barriers when they have a community. And so I feel like, the idea that like, if we're going to learn without a community, then I feel like it's going to suffer the same problems as other areas in our world that are community-less, And I also, and I think in that I have a responsibility to try to be better at building those communities, like in the classroom. Like in my class before ours, I have a very strong sense of community in there, and that everybody's there to do the thing, pretty much, and I'm like, I don't really know why, and I think probably why is that, well, one, I think those students have been around longer, they've been in other classes together, they've studied with me before, but also...
is it like a bachelor's, like 300, 400?
Yeah, it's a 400 level class, and most of the students in there have studied with me already, so,
they know the drill.
Yeah. It's also a 400 level class, so they're just expected, like, read the novel and come back and let's talk about it. It's a seminar, so they're more expecting to participate in there, but yeah, I don't know what I'm saying here, except for the
So is your way of teaching like trying to fight that sense of isolation?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and I don't know how well I'm doing at it, but
it's funny to watch. I love watching you like talk, and then once you address a student, you just go sit next to them or at the table. I think that's so funny.
I mean, my classes we used to, and we probably should again just sit in a circle and like, here's the book. It also partly, like, I mean, technology influences all this stuff, right? Like, technology makes it so easy to not be there, and sometimes that's great, I mean, sometimes, like, I can go somewhere because if someone needs me, they can reach me,
Yeah.
and otherwise I'd sit home and wait for them, like, I appreciate all of that stuff, but partly too is like, people want to be at a desk now because they want to have their computer in front of them. They're probably reading on a device or they're reading on their phone, and I feel like how we used to do it and sitting around in the communal act of like turn to page whatever was actually, it put us physically in the room, it put us in our bodies, it put us in that place in a way that was really productive. And I kind of like, I would prefer that, and that's still how we do it, like in a graduate class, which still seems to function in a very like old-fashioned way. But I'm also super conscious about making my classes like free or low cost to students and making things available to them digitally, because like in our class, they used to have a reader. We used to use a reader that cost like $80 like 20 years ago, and then they split it into 2 volumes and it cost like $150. And then
how did you get access to the reader we have? Because it's
I just
read your pages.
Yeah, I just made it because in our class everything's available free in the public domain. I don't have to.
That's true.
I don't have to do anything illegal to give it to you. So I've just compiled it, and it's got some gaps in and stuff. It's not super perfect, but it works because everything's available to us, and I think that's cool. I do think that's cool. Like, I believe in access, open access to things. I believe in the Benjamin Franklin model of like, give people good access to information and they'll learn good things. I actually don't know if that's 100% true because there's so much disinformation out there, but so it is a principle to me to like make that available free, and I don't want to make you buy a book, but on the other hand, I do think it's better for us to sit down with one common text that we have in our hands.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, because it's funny. It makes sense now. I didn't realize it was just public domain.
Yeah.
Like, did you just pirate these off of different websites, or how did you?
It's all legal.
Yeah, it's a 330-page document.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
It's legal. I mean, I'm not above it. Usually I don't know, it's interesting too the way students use technology like adjacent to the class. Like I teach a class in the whatever it's changing, I think it's now something innovation and design, but it used to be science, technology, and values, but one of the science pathways, and those students usually like start a Discord and they share stuff with each other. So like sometimes I'll like assign a thing and somebody will, and like you could buy it or whatever, and people will be like, oh, I'll put it on the Discord. I'm like, oh, well, that's between you and the Discord.
Yeah.
but like our class doesn't really do that. Our English majors don't really do that, I don't think. But maybe they do. I don't know. I think also when I think about like English majors as like a group of people, like I also recognize that those groups kind of form and dissolve and reform, you know, like I feel like you're too new here to see a pattern, right? You know, like you just have your experience here, but I always see like the major as having like a wave and trough kind of thing. Like the wave will build and like everyone will know each other and be kind of like a group that I could, you know, like I could identify the personality of the English major at a particular year, but then there'll be like a trough and new people will come, and there's some stragglers who are graduating, you know, who'll be graduating like mid-year and stuff, and but like then it'll build as a wave again and you'll be more of a cohesive group, you know, like you know people in our class that you're friendly with, and like, you know, you'll
at my one table.
Yeah, but like, you know, like you will be you know, like that will start to form more of a group the next time you're in a class together, right? And then like I will register that as an instructor, like, you know, that I'll see that, because I like in some ways I'm lamenting that I'm not better at creating community, and maybe some other professors are better at it. I think some of them are. I mean, I could name some who I think are, you know, but it's also partly just a feature of you know, the students getting familiar with each other and then like becoming kind of a group, you know, and when that happens, it's super I don't know, easy for me to just like join that energy rather than creating it, you know. And partly I'm lazy and not helping create it, but also I've always that's always been a thing that I could just sort of like redirect or join, you know, like there's already a community, there's already energy, there's already relationships, and I can just like be a part of it, and I prefer that kind of model, right? Because you know, you're learning here, this is your journey here, I'm trying to just like influence it. I'm not trying to like, I don't want to do like, this is what I know, get on board, listen to me, right? And maybe I should. I mean, maybe I probably used to be more like that. I probably used to be more arrogant about it, you know, like I know some stuff and you should know it, but I don't really feel that way as much anymore, you know.
It's funny because that belief is played out in your teaching style. Like it's not very much. I had a teacher at the junior college in Santa Rosa who was talking about, he said in African societies, their teaching is like kind of in a circle. And it's very much like we all have an experience. How can we like form each other's? Versus like the Western ideal is like the teacher is standing here and everyone's looking at the teacher. And your belief in like, maybe I don't know everything, or like here it is kind of showing your teaching where you just kind of sit.
Well, yeah, and I think, you know, like I think about this a lot, like the structure of the room in some way. Like, it forces me to be up in front of the room, you know, like running the computer, right? So like I'm the Wizard of Oz guy controlling the, you know, controlling what you see and what you experience, and that's a problem in some ways, you know.
Why?
Because again, it like centralizes, like it gets this like banking model of education, like you're empty and I'm full and I'm going to give you some stuff to fill you up, and that's not how it works for me, you know. And that's not, I mean, it can, if we're talking about like, you know, hey, don't mix bleach and ammonia together.
Or fishing,
you know, even some fishing stuff, like you know, here's how to do it. Even that, though, I'm not really like that. I'm like, you know, hey, here's a way to do this, but like, you know, you should have a style and you should look around and see what works for you, you know, like, you know, when you start this thread on the hook, there are different ways to do it. Here's how I do it on this fly. Here's how, you know, do the one that works for you, you know. So I still try to be like that, even when it's like a strictly like order dependent knowledge based thing. I still want to be open to like, hey, there are other ways to do this, and you should embody this knowledge, not just like remember it, you know. I don't know, but again, I don't know. Like sometimes, like I might. I mean, I realize I could also be a little bit more direct about some things a lot of the time, you know. A lot of times I'm just like, okay, you're not really into this, so let's just not do it, I guess, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm a little bit more easily dissuaded than I used to be, I think.
What is one thing you wish more students knew about teaching?
They knew about teaching? I don't. I don't know. I mean, in a way, I would say I could say a lot of things, but one I might say like nothing because like in a way like it's not really your job to care about me, or and that's not really the right way to say that, but it's like it's my job to meet students where they are, right? And so when I'm thinking about like when I'm talking about like COVID generation students who are not as good at social learning stuff, it's my job to teach you that.
Yeah.
It's my job to build that bridge. It's not your job, their job to come in and go like, how are we going to make Matt happy? You know, so I don't know. I just want to say that. I mean, like when I express frustration with like students are not as inclined to come to class, or they're not as eager to participate, or they don't care as much about old texts as they used to. Those are really just like, that's just expressing my frustration of not being good enough at bridging the gap between, filling that gap. Because I don't blame students for that. I'm enough of a, I believe that there are structures in place that create that. It's not like students decide that. When students come in and they don't care about what I'm talking about, if one of them doesn't care about it, and that person might be apathetic, but like if no one cares about it, then it might not be relevant, and I might need to think of another way to make it more relevant, So, that's how I try to approach it. I think that does lead to a lot of, like, for me, like a lot of doubt about what I know or about how useful I am to people. But on the other hand, I do think I'm trying to, like, try to think about, like, who are you as a group of young people or whatever, a group of students, group of learners, and like, what do you need from me? And I try to do that thing. And I'm not saying I'm good at it. But that's the struggle I'm in all the time. Yeah.
How do you choose the texts that we read? Like, what's the criteria? Because sometimes it feels like it's like they don't have anything to do with each other, but I see the timeline. Is there a procedure?
Yeah, I think that one I need to work more, like in our class particularly, on like rebuilding some of those relationships, I used to teach the class. So the class used to be 45 days. Now it's 30 days. And I used to require you to read a lot of things outside of class that I don't require anymore. And I probably should. So I used to do it chronologically. And we just like, boom. And chronologically, at a certain level, you don't need to argue for chronological organization or something. But a certain way you do, because like you're still picking different texts from different times that are meant to be representative of a certain thing, And a lot of times in the past, I would, like, if the students seemed to be interested in one conversation, we would more pursue it. Like if people were more interested in the political text, we'd talk more about that. If they were more interested in the anti-slavery text, we'd talk about that. If they were interested in the more, belletristic, like pretty text, we would follow that. But then I would often end up like not feeling like I covered the time very well, or that I left out really significant things. So now I'm kind of trying to like focus on like kind of cornerstone texts that like people wouldn't expect that you would know from this period, But basically I'm trying to pick texts that are in a conversation with each other across time, so that you can see that, literature and culture are, they're part of a conversation that happens across time, and that there are certain like core things that we've kind of always cared about as Americans, which is kind of important for me. Like I'm interested in American identity as a conversation, and I'm interested in how that's changing right now, or whether it's still the same, or what parts are still, we're still hanging on to. So yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I'm trying to have texts that ask that question, like, who are we as a people or as a nation, and are we still that? Do we still believe in that?
Who do you think we are as a nation?
I don't know. That's a huge question. I do think some things that are fairly constant. Most of us, except for Native people, and even that. Except for like wholly Native people, are like leavers. We're people who left somewhere else and are ready to do that. It's partly why we're obsessed with mobility. You know, we're totally obsessed with mobility and individual mobility. Like we don't like, you know, we were talking about trains before. We don't really like trains. We like to move around on our horse or in our car individually and make individual decisions about that. You know, don't like the idea that we're going somewhere collectively, even though we could. I think that's important.
Do you think that was a wrong idea to have? You were talking about community earlier. Do you think it was wrong to kind of have that individualistic foundation?
Well, I mean, no, I don't know. I mean, I'm a pretty like go do your own thing as guy, as you might know. You know, like I'm just like, oh, I want to be a guitar maker now, and I make guitars. I want to be a fly fishing guide now, and I'm, you know, like I kind of like am a pretty radical individualist in a lot of ways. You know. Which, on the way, by the way, I mean, that's kind of why I am interested in community, because I try to join communities of those people after I get involved in these new things. Otherwise, they just kind of go out into nowhere. But no, I don't know. I mean, like that kind of like stubborn individualism is something I kind of admire and kind of like. But, you know, I think that there's also, I mean, obviously, it's regularly taken too far. But also, I think that, like, if we understood, for instance, like I want a high-speed train to take me somewhere instead of having to sit on I-5, right? You know, like that would be great for me, right? They got that back east, and it kind of works for people, you know, and so like, if we recognize like, oh, as a people we love mobility and we associate physical mobility with social mobility, and that's why we think if we can move and leave that we're free people, you know, and we value that. Then that's cool. And then if we just thought like, oh, but wait a minute, like we could still feel that way on a train. We don't have to do that in a car because other people have done it in a ship or whatever in the past, you know. Other people did it on a train before they had a car, you know. Then we might be able to be more open to those kinds of things or changes or something like that. So do you know what I'm saying? I mean, I think that like if we understand a thing as a core principle, not necessarily like for Americans, I think mobility is a car, right? But it's like, but if we could, and that might be changing too as a generational thing, because young people aren't getting driver's licenses and stuff like they used to. Like,
really?
Yeah. But if we could, you know, think like, oh no, mobility is not a car. Mobility is the ability to travel around where and when you want to. You're like, oh, a train actually might be better for that. When I lived in Boston, if you wanted to go somewhere by car, good luck. You might still be sitting there in traffic, you know. But if you knew how to use the train and the subway, you could go wherever you wanted quickly, you know. So like, you know, so like in that sense, that facilitated a more, you know, American kind of freedom and mobility than a car did, right? I don't even know what we're talking about, but yeah, I think that again, like, thinking about like these sort of like cultural like features or cultural you know markers of our identity in isolation will allow us to also be more open to changing the context of that and hanging on to that principle.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I just think about like if you study American life and American culture, at different times we've thought of ourselves in particular ways, and then we've totally changed the way we've lived, and we've still thought about ourselves in those same ways.
What do you mean? Give examples.
Well, I mean, like if we look at like, you know, after World War II, we pretty much totally changed the way we lived, right? Like there are going to be fewer of us doing agriculture. There are going to be more people living in cities. Then there are also going to be people living in suburbs. We're going to have cars. We're going to have a bunch of like packaged foods, and we're gonna start you know, men are going to start shaving and having haircuts and be more like military, you know. And there's a kind of militarization of culture and you know, if we think about like that post-war culture, it's its own thing, and it's fairly distinct from, you know, American culture before World War II, right? It looks different. We totally changed the way we lived. We changed the way we dressed. We changed the way we ate. We changed the way we did school. We changed all these things, you know, and we changed the purpose of college, you know, for the most part. And everyone's like, cool, we're good with it. Everything's fine. We like that, you know. And I just feel like if we understand, like, oh, but wait a minute, we did those things. We didn't give up our autonomy. We didn't give up our individuality. We didn't give up our we didn't give up our mobility. We didn't give up our freedom. We just got it in a different way, right? And I think that if people realize that, then we can get it in a different way again that might be, I don't know, more sustainable, less harmful, more inclusive, So.
Do those same kind of ideals happen in other post-war periods, like 1812, Civil War, World War One?
Probably, yeah, sure. I mean, our most of our wars have rearranged American life fairly significantly, and invented other cultures. Like on your list, you wanted to talk about dueling, but the post-Civil War took our culture of dueling sort of out west, and restructured things a lot. I mean, the period after the Civil War really restructured American life in pretty dramatic ways, And the period between World War I and World War II did also, but that period ends up being a couple of periods, because between the war and the crash of the stock market, there was a sort of like emerging areas of American culture. Things were changing quickly, but then that kind of came to a quick end when the Depression hit, and we just kind of mired in that until World War II. So, which probably that also, 10 years of poverty and struggle and suffering probably made people more open to whatever change was going to come after the war. Particularly because it came with prosperity, and so. People are like, whatever we have to endure, whatever we have to give up is fine with us because we're getting all of this stuff. We're able to eat and live and move and stuff.
It's funny. I was just thinking that same promise of prosperity but it ended up in two different ways between us and Germany. Post World War One, we were tanked with the Great Depression, and they were tanked with the Treaty of Versailles.
Yeah.
We just went kind of different directions.
Yeah.
Which is crazy that both populations wanted the same thing.
Yeah.
And just went
completely
left or right.
Yeah.
That's wild. Do you think? So we've talked about like culture has changed, and does writing kind of change the culture? Does writing react to the culture? How does?
Both. I think that's a good question. Both. I gotta admit at a certain level that literature does less cultural work than people like me hope it does.
Please.
You know what I mean? Look, I do think that like stories form the foundations of our understanding, and they form the foundations of change. But those stories are not always necessarily like fiction, right? Like cultural narratives drive change in our culture, but those are not always necessarily stem from a work of fiction, right? But I do think that we do I do at a certain level think we do always write and invent the future. I think just like the nature of language is that like nothing that you have in the world didn't exist as language before you had it in the world,
Like as an idea?
Yeah, you have to like verbalize. You have to invent something by language before you can invent it as a thing. Like, if you're like, you're like, Matt, I want a guitar. Can you build me a guitar? And then we have to, what kind of a guitar do you want? What's the scale length going to be? What size is it? What's it for? So like we have to have a conversation about that. We have to invent it with language before we can start acting on inventing it. And I think that's true of like social things too. I think that, that like if you are going to have a culture that does a different thing, then somebody has to make a story, has to invent that in a story so that people can then visualize it and then act upon it, right? So I do believe in the power of language to invent the future in that way. And you can point to particular texts that had a profound impact on our culture, but also I think it's sometimes easy to overstate the importance of those. And and I think that there are more than one, and they're participating in a broader conversation, and so at that level, maybe literature is joining that conversation more than driving it. But people like us who want to study, literary text in isolation, pull it out and go like, see, like there's the thing about where Lincoln allegedly said to Harriet Beecher Stowe, "You're the little woman who started this great war," or whatever the thing was, and it's like, well, Uncle Tom's Cabin was 10 years before the Civil War. Yeah, it may have had a galvanizing effect for people, and it did, and I don't want to diminish it as an important, document, important text that did a lot of cultural work, but it's not like Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, and then people were like, okay, that's it, we've had enough, let's go have a war, let's end slavery, let's have a vote. I mean, it didn't work that way, unfortunately, So obviously, it was an important text among the thousands of others that were saying the same thing. She added her voice to a chorus of people shouting for the end of slavery, and so it was an important text in there. But it's like, the people whose job it is to study that, like me, might want to overstate the significance of that one document within that conversation. They're, yeah. I mean, maybe I'm not giving literature enough credit, but there's but you know what I say? And I'm saying and a lot of times a text will start a conversation, more people will join in with it. Like you had something about Equiano on your thing. Like Equiano is usually credited as writing the first autobiography of a person of African descent written in English. And then there are a bunch after, and then he calls it his interesting narrative, blah blah blah, written by himself, and then written by himself becomes his tagline that other authors want to put on there, and he has influence. He definitely has influence. There's no doubt about it. But those texts together did a tremendous amount of cultural work, but his did not necessarily do it all on its own.
So it's more of the genre. It's like a domino effect. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think there is a domino effect, and I do think the establishment of a genre gives people a new way of conceiving of a problem or a situation and understanding it, and then maybe even changing it. But I also think that that's part of a broader conversation that's going on, and in some ways, it might be the smaller part of it. We talked about how in class, I think we talked about how Equiano tells Granville Sharp about the Zong massacre, and then that's an important moment in the anti-slavery movement, particularly in Britain. But it's there was a huge conversation going on about that, and as I mentioned, all of the sailors knew that happened. They're all telling each other about that, particularly those who either were or had been enslaved. And Equiano just makes that visible. So his text is important in making that visible. But the conversation was much larger than him. He's just one of the participants in it. He's just the one who has got to make it visible or something like that. And so, yeah. And so I don't know what I'm saying here, except for that, I think the idea that one text, I think that we're really super obsessed as a nation with a one thing making something happen, Henry Ford's the one guy who invented the car even though he didn't, or Alexander Graham Bell's the one guy who invented the the telephone, or and we really want that. We really want to isolate all of those sort of virtues in one person and celebrate them in one person, and they just don't really happen that way.
Where does that come from? That wanting to put it on one person?
I think our obsession with a Christ-focused Christianity, probably, and we want the one person to save and redeem us, rather than thinking about it as a community or as a group of people or as a group of disciples all doing a similar work, and I think we want to arrogate to, people that level of importance, and that's not really how people work, so, and why not? I'm sure there are other factors too, but we like to think that one person did a thing, one person doesn't do a thing. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, like we go out, you can look at our buildings on campus and you're like, oh, this guy Chester Cole designed this building, his name's on everything. He designed all these buildings around town, all these houses. He's an important guy here, and he was, he was. But it's like he didn't go and stack those bricks,
Yeah.
like
It's everybody else.
he may have drawn a picture of how those courses were supposed to run, but some skilled masons went and stacked them, and so I kind of think that's. Yeah, I don't know if we're on a track or if we need to be on one, if we're getting off of it, but yeah, I think that we often want to think about like the one thing that did a thing because we believe in that. We sort of deeply believe in that concept that like one person's going to like do the thing or get the credit for the thing or stand up against the thing or whatever. And again, like that's not to downplay the individual people who are important in these things. But we're kind of talking about this in class right now. Like there's after the War of 1812, there's this sort of movement to like deify the founding fathers, and particularly Washington, but not just Washington. Also Paul Revere in the Longfellow poem, or Franklin, or and it's the same thing. Like one person can do this thing, and I think that's powerful because people are like, oh, well, then maybe I could do a thing, and it would be significant. It wouldn't be lost, but it's like not to diminish it, but like Paul Revere just rode a horse yelling a thing, right? And he rode a horse yelling a thing to people who actually did the thing, right? I mean, he didn't go out there and yell, "The British are coming," and then pick up the one gun and stand there against the soldiers on the other side of the river, and so you know what I mean. So it's like. So it's like you can say that he did this thing and it had this like electric or galvanizing effect, and okay, cool, but like those people were there to be galvanized, He didn't do it all on his own.
Is that where the American dream comes from? That concept, or is that from somewhere else?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, maybe. I mean, who knows, too? Like, I mean, like, I don't know about this stuff. I just, like, construct these stories, too, like, based on, like, literary text, I mean, like, when we were reading Winthrop earlier, and it's like, God gives you stuff as a sign of his favor is a fairly, I don't know, theologically inconsistent position to take for a lot of people, but like in America, we like believe in that. So it's like, I mean, the American dream is basically like, we've talked a lot about this, but like replace God with the idea of America, secularize the idea of God, right? Or make the nation the thing. And then, so then you like do the right things for the nation. Like you're hardworking, you're industrious, you're individualistic, and then you'll get the stuff you want. Pretty much the same thing as a Winthrop thing, I don't know, It's a Puritan work ethic thing, though, It's like the Puritan work ethic was like if you did good works, God would recognize it and recognize you, and then we've just shifted over to like if you do good works, America will recognize you and reward you, And so, yeah, I think it's a secularization of that basic idea, but also. It's not just that because, for instance, like, I mean, I'm not super cynical about the American dream. And like, it works for some people at a certain level. It doesn't work for everybody. It's not perfect as a concept, but it's like in order to believe that, you also have to be in a place where you see it happening, People don't talk about the American dream as much anymore because they just don't see it happening,
Yeah.
So. Like when the economy supported like, I mean, 50 years ago, you could have just decided like, I don't know if I can finish school because, I want to get married and start a family. I want, and you're like, you go get a job and it pays you enough to do that, and then, you're retiring years later and you're like, I kind of wish I had finished college, but I had a great life. That's not really a thing anymore, so. I'm not here to lament the general state of the economy, but But you know what I mean? So again, I think like these things are, even these ideas that we're talking about, and we're talking about them being connected to literary texts and stuff, I think that's interesting. I think that's right to a certain level, but I also think that those things are over-determined by a lot of other cultural forces that may be guided by that story, but may not be guided by that story. They might be guided by another story that I'm not the person to understand, right? You know, like they might be guided by they're guided by economic forces, and I don't understand economics necessarily, or they're guided by scientific forces, and I don't, and on the other hand, that's our job as an academic, just get super focused on one thing and then say it, and then your job as a student is to look at the different ways of looking at it and synthesize those somehow, though we never give you the opportunity to do it, which is unfortunate.
What would that opportunity look like to give the student the ability to synthesize everything?
I mean, I think that our educational system, it's been around longer than that, but it really sort of the way we do it, in the university, post World War II, post GI Bill, is very militarized. We don't, and I try to not be that, but you think about a person standing in the front of the room telling people what to do, and then they go out and they do a thing. It's just like the military briefing, here's what we're going to do. Or when you watch the old cop shows and they gather in the room, they make a few wise ass remarks and they talk to each other, and then they go out and they do their job. Be safe out there, people, or whatever. And so that model, I don't know. I mean, I recognize structurally why that has been around and things like that. But that's the deal. I'm gonna talk to Matt about about Equiano or about Emerson or about Margaret Fuller or whatever today. And then you're gonna talk to somebody else about something else. When someone's gonna talk to you about math, someone's gonna talk to you about science. Somebody's gonna talk to you about geography. And you're gonna go out and and then you're supposedly somehow going to go back at the end of the day, and you're going to put all that together in a package that means something to you, and I'm not totally cynical about that, because I've learned just from all kinds of different things, all different ways, and I all the time will suddenly have use for some seemingly useless knowledge, and I'm like, oh wow, good thing I learned about whatever. And also, by the way, just learning stuff is good for your brain, and you don't necessarily need to do something with everything you learn. However, I do really believe in project-based social learning as a better model than what we do. So well, I mean, we have a couple of classes like this. We have a class, English 415, editing literary magazines, where you get together and you make a literary magazine, and you're not just studying the software that you use for it. You're not just studying how to use editor marks when you're copy editing so the writer knows what you're talking about. You're doing that for a reason, and the reason is to produce this thing. And we're going to learn whatever we need to learn in order to produce that thing. And I like that model, and I also like models that integrate different disciplines, I have my wife's school, which I think they do a wonderful job. Theater is for her school, football is in a small town in Texas or something, the whole school is involved, they'll have 80 or 90% of the students involved in a production, or at least within the school year, involved in productions, and it'll be okay, so we've got a text, we're going to have a play, so we're going to study that in English and see what's this play mean, what do we need to, what do we do with the language, and there'll be engineering students designing sets, and there'll be audiovisual students doing lighting and cameras and filming things, and it's hey, our job is to put on this really great production that will appeal to a much broader audience than just the school. People from the community will see it. We'll be able to make back the money we invest in it, and whoever can help in whatever way needs to come and help, and And I just feel like people learn so many valuable things from that don't have anything to do with theater or language, or they just have to do with learning how to do life. How do you show up and like find your value and then like participate in a thing and demonstrate your value to the community that you've decided to be a part of, you know. And I think that's a really, really essential thing, particularly right now in life when we're just learning these little compartmentalized things. And if our compartmentalized learning doesn't line up with like a job, then we're kind of out of luck.
There was a project I was just told about in my brother's girlfriend's business class, and she was saying they have kind of similar thing. They have to create a play.
Yeah, I've heard about this.
Yeah, and there's like 8 groups, and one of them's production. And
Yeah.
the thing is, the teacher can make any changes he wants one time. So I think she gave the example. There was fires that came through, didn't change a thing about the project. Like you just had to go and put on this production, and it's like I think she was saying there was 1 year where they spent like $6,400 on a production team.
Wow, really?
Yeah, so it's just like go for it.
Yeah.
Have your meetings. This is due at this day.
Yeah.
Figure it out.
I think that's great. I love it. Yeah, I've heard about that class. I had some students one time. They were in my GE class. Mostly has science students in it, but it occasionally have some business students, and they asked me for help on like writing the play one time.
Oh,
and
yeah.
so, and yeah, I think that's great. You know, it's like let's actually do a thing. Also, as a business in a business class, to think about like, hey, you know, the way you present yourself, the role you play when you're asking for money or courting investors or talk, you know, those are really important skills, you know, like having a person, like, you know, in the class that has all the engineering students, like the project leader on those projects that they do in there is almost always, you know, a potentially great literature student. You know, they're always the person. Yeah, they're always the person who's best with language and best with like interpreting a social situation and knowing how to talk to different people. I mean, you know, how you talk to the person you're asking for money, and how you talk to the engineer, and how you talk to the, you know, fabricator is just, it's a different language, is a different skill set. You know, and somebody who can navigate those different things is the leader. You know, like you call that person the leader, and a person who can only do one of those things is called the whatever, not the leader. You know, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like we don't spend a lot of time showing that student or those students like how valuable those communication skills are, and we also don't show our students like in the humanities how valuable those same skills are like in that context, like you know, we don't have our students participating in like engineering and you know, I mean the thing that we get, like, you know, like at my wife's school, the thing that they get is like you'll have the kids who can make stuff, you'll have the kids who can design things, and then, you know, and then they're not necessarily always the most creative people, so you know, the artsy types will be like, hey, you know, we want this, you know, like we want a set that revolves around and has 3 segments, and this is one of their sets they did. It was cool, like a curtain, and then they would rotate it to the next scene and rotate it to the next scene, so they got 3 scenes without resetting the set. And you know, you have some creative type who's like, this is what I want, and then you have some, you know, like engineering students who are like, oh, we could put it on a track. You know what I mean? It's like, and it's like you can figure out how to make all of that better by having people with different skill sets involved in that, rather than just like having it stem from one person. If it was designed by an engineer to begin with, then who even cares? Because like
it'd be functional but not cool.
Yeah, it would have been functional, but it wouldn't have like served the play or whatever, you know. So I don't know if this is anything like we're talking about, but like I just do wish that our that we had an educational system that was more integrated and more you know, project based or project focused. And I don't
hands on.
Yeah, because I think, you know, like I think so many of our students are so disconnected from doing things. You know. Don't you?
Yeah, I haven't done a good job of getting to know other students.
Yeah.
Like I've been pretty routine based.
And I don't know if it's just our students. I mean, it might be students in general. I've had a lot of students over the last several years tell me like how much they miss pandemic and miss lockdown and miss being at home.
Yeah.
And
What?
I know, and that's how I feel about it too. And they're like, but yeah, you know, you feel that way because you do stuff, and like, you know, if you don't like to do stuff and you're not required to, then you feel comfortable with that. And if you like to do stuff and you're not allowed to, then you feel uncomfortable. But then when you flip that around, if people expect you to do stuff but you don't want to, then you're uncomfortable, right? It's like, well, I don't know, maybe we should force some people out into the try and do stuff kind of world, because
I feel like COVID really pushed people to the doers and the not.
I do too.
Yeah.
And you know, like when I think about myself, like if that would have happened to me at a certain point in my life, I might have embraced that, like, don't do anything, shut down. I'm not a particularly social person in some ways. I know that might surprise you to hear me say that, you know, but like, I'm not, and I haven't always necessarily been good at like navigating complicated social situations. I've got anxiety about it and stuff, you know, so like, had I been allowed to just like indulge that and stay in that, then I wouldn't be talking to you right now. I'd be doing something else, you know.
Yeah, it's crazy to think if that happened when you were growing up.
Yeah.
How would you even be a teacher?
I would. I think I
what
would
change.
I think I wouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. I also wonder how they would have done it. It's so crazy. I mean, they would have probably someone would have gone. He probably would have gone to school and picked up a packet or something. You know. Somebody would have packaged it together in a gym by, you know, all alone in a gym, set them out. One of my, you know, some of the district, they still did free lunches during the time. One of my close friends was in charge of that, I guess. They would just make the lunches, and they just put them out on the table, and people would come and grab them, you know. Probably would have been like that. But yeah, no, that's what I'm thinking. You know, with my levels of social anxiety and stuff, you know, I would have probably, had I been allowed to just you know, indulge that, then I would probably still be in that. And I didn't want to be crippled by social anxiety. I wanted to get over it, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Does teaching help it, or does it make it?
Yeah, teaching. I mean, it's interesting because, you know, I still, you know, I still experience that sometimes. I still experience dread of being at a party and stuff sometimes. Not always, you know, but teaching, I still get stage fright or super nervous, if I'm giving a lecture or something, and a bunch of people walk in, I don't know them, you know, and I'm like, wow, why are these people here? You know, I expected there to be 10 people, you know, and I feel that way a little bit on the first day of class, but then I just feel like I'm having a conversation with people I like, you know, that's the way I think about it. I'm just in a room with people I like, and I want to talk to them.
Then they'll talk anyways. I guess the ones you do like will be the ones who are talking.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. So, you know, to me, it doesn't seem like I'm going in to give a talk, or that people are gonna, you know. I mean, occasionally I'll get self-conscious when I'm in there. I'm like, wow, I'm dying up here.
Is that what goes through it? Because I used to think about this when teachers will ask a question and nobody responds.
Yeah.
In my head, I'm like, I'm sorry for you. This sucks. Because it kind of happens in the class I have after. And in my head, I'm like, I wish I had an answer for you.
Yeah.
And because sometimes you'll be writing stuff down, and then the question's asked, and you're so focused on writing down. What goes through your head when just no one responds?
Well, I mean, it depends. Sometimes I'll be okay with sometimes I'll be okay with just sitting with it. It depends on when it is, you know. But a lot of times I'm not. I used to be better with just sitting with it, I think. But I mean, what usually goes through my head is that I'm asking it in the wrong way, and I need to go at it a different way, you know. But there is a thing where, you know, if no one responds, there's a kind of, you know, breakover points. You get a certain number of people talking, then everyone will talk, and then you go below that and no one will talk, you know. So people sit there oh, well, I don't want to be the only one who talks, or or I think maybe this idea is stupid, or I think, this is obvious, or maybe this is wrong. And people are usually going through that. This is why I deflect a lot. Like, I'll try to just like joke around and move away from it, and then try to come back to it, and see if somebody will say something, maybe lighten the mood or whatever. I know the mood's pretty light already, but like just try to look away from it and look back at it, and then sometimes people will answer the question. But yeah, in art class, I mean, it's kind of tough. I mean, there are obviously people of goodwill in there. Like there are people I like in there who seem to like me and who are playing along. But it's not a real boisterous kind of a class, and so I have a hard time getting a response out of you sometimes. And yeah, I just try to look away from it and come back to it as my normal technique. Like, I'll tell some dumb story or something and then like ask it again, or try to ask it in a different way, and sometimes people will then answer because they're like, oh, okay, well, I'm not as on the spot now because people have laughed or talked or said something else, and try to get that needle over to the other side, and sometimes that works. I mean, a lot of times that works. That's what I usually do when I'm screwing around. I mean, I usually just try to fill that space with something that's like not the question, so that we can come back to it. Or I try to fill the space with something that is the answer to the question, but you don't know it is until maybe later. I'll tell some dumb story that is actually the answer to the question I asked. If you just think about it for a minute,
Yeah, okay, I do want to jump ship. I didn't know any of this. The story of Equiano and black sailors, I didn't know that was a thing. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, what do you mean what do you mean you didn't know it was a thing?
Well, I didn't, when I think about the time, in my head it was kind of just like black people were slaves, and that was kind of their role, and they didn't really do anything else.
Yeah.
And then this happened.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is...
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people have understandably, because of the way it's taught to you and everything, a pretty monolithic view of what the life of enslaved people was in America and the Americas, and the thing that's kind of shocking to a lot of people is that a lot of people who were enslaved had jobs where they got paid wages that they paid to their quote unquote owners, and so that's one weird thing, that you don't think that's the way it works. You think of it strictly as a agricultural labor kind of context, or people were like servants to people in their houses and stuff like that. But yeah, a lot of people just had a job, lived away from the person who collected their wages, which seems even more wrong. I mean, wronger. So that's a thing, that we learned from that. But yeah, also the number of people the number of people of African descent who were at sea doing that kind of work was pretty large. And they mostly never made it to the level of officers, obviously, because that would, they didn't have that opportunity. But a lot of times, black sailors, whether they were enslaved or free or whatever, were in the maritime trades longer than white sailors because it was a terrible job. So, as a terrible job for free people, it might have been a better job for somebody who was enslaved. Equiano, for instance, he had these various people who controlled his labor and controlled his wages. Is that working?
Yeah, I just want to make sure it's still recording. It's
yeah, good. Okay, yeah. But for him, had he been on a rice plantation in South Carolina or something, he would have just died in obscurity there, But he was able to do all kinds of stuff as somebody who was a sailor. He had mobility. He could move around the world. He could see the world. He could be in contact with different populations of enslaved people and free black people, and even, people in Africa. He could learn to read and write because there was a strict social division between the people and the officers, and the people were the people who were the common sailors, and they didn't mix with the officers. In fact, the officers sometimes would be attacked if they went into the seamen's quarters, So there a division there, and so like it's not like
on the ships or
on the ships, sorry, and so within the wooden world, as they called it, which is like a microcosm of the world, there were, to a certain extent, people made up their own rules, and that doesn't mean that there wasn't like racism or violence or strife in the forecastle where the sailors lived, but there also potentially could not be this. There was a potential for those things to be socially constructed based on the rules of the particular ship and the particular people involved. And so the thing that happens is like a lot of black sailors were longer in the trades and more competent seamen than their white counterparts because, like Melville was a sailor, like he went on a whaling voyage and, professional sailor, and he did it because he was just absolutely desperate for money and had nowhere to go. And then, then as soon as he could stop doing it, he stopped doing it. You know what I'm saying? So like, but like if your choice is like, oh, you can leave the sea and then you can go work on a plantation somewhere or have somebody, over your back all the time, keeping an eye on you, well, then for a person like Equiano, it was the best job in the world rather than the worst one in the world. And so a lot of times those black sailors, like, even though they didn't become like officers, they had positions of power, prestige, privilege within the ordinary sailors, because a lot of times they were just more competent. And like, if you're going up the mast to change a sail, you kind of care more about the competence of the person next to you, not their social status or their race or whatever, And so it fostered a level of cultural exchange and a level of like social, I don't know, that allowed enslaved people to move up a social hierarchy that they wouldn't have been allowed to, and even just to have contact with white people. If Equiano had been on shore, it would have been illegal to teach him to read and write, but he has a guy on the ship that he's friends with who teaches him how to read and write. And it's like, was it illegal? Yeah. Who's going to do anything about it? Is the officers are going to do anything about it? No. So like even just like the level of literacy that he's able to achieve has to do with like sailoring. So it was they were an important part of the maritime trades, and African Americans up until like, I don't know, they're still involved in the maritime trades, but even in the whaling trade, there were black sailors until the whaling trade was kind of effectively, ended by the Civil War. But there were at times like up to like 40% of the people in those jobs were people of African descent. And you don't know that because like if you see depictions of like Yankee whaling, it's just all white people, but the fact is, some large percentage of them would have been black. Even on like Nantucket, New Bedford, and places like that, where we think of it as just like, we think of it as like the center of white peopleness, and there were these large black communities there who were participated in that. So yeah, it's a really fascinating thing. And for me, like, there's a really important book about this by a guy I study with, and it's called Blackjacks, and it's just like a sort of, I think his situation was he'd sailed down in the Caribbean and he was like grew up like in yachting community in New England or whatever, and then he goes sails down the Caribbean. It's like, oh, there are all kinds of black sailors down here, and you go to all these islands and like all these, and then he's like, how come I never see African Americans in like yachting culture or maritime culture in New England, And it's like, well, they aren't there anymore. But anyway, so like that started his study of like blackjacks, they called them, like black sailors, and what I noticed in that is like, wow, a lot of these people who wrote these autobiographies were sailors. So what's the connection between sailoring and writing that we're missing? That's the thing that became interesting to me in that research, and part of the answer is that because you can learn to write in a way that you can't. Like Frederick Douglass learns to write in some interesting ways. Part of it has to do with sailors, by the way. Like he, in the shipyard, they mark timbers, and he learns how to write to mark the timbers when he's working in the shipyard. He worked as a caulker, which is, a guy who hammers oakum and cotton into the seams of the ship, and so he was involved in those trades, and like it's essential to him becoming a writer. But so like they could, one, you just have access to writing and literacy, but two, they would know stuff because things traveled around. I mean, in a world before like the internet or transcontinental telegraph or anything, it's like how did information get from from Boston to London, or from London back to New Orleans? It got there by people on ships saying it, right? And the officers and the owners would have one story, but the ordinary sailors would have another story, and obviously they'd be more focused on things like exploitation and things that were happening to them. They'd care more about that because they were in that exploited class. So like not only did these writers have develop literacy that they would have been denied on shore, they had access to information and stories, and they understood things that they would have never seen if they'd have been on shore. So it turns out that like the first 6 autobiographies in English of people of African descent were all written by sailors. And people are like, what's the common denominator here? Well, for me, the common denominator is that they were sailors. So that's how they had something to write about, basically.
Was it common knowledge in the black community to see sailors as becoming literate, and did they try and flock there as a means to?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it was common to see them as subversive.
What do you mean?
Well, it was common to see them as like somebody who could be counted on in a bad situation. I mean, so like the Underground Railroad, we talk about the Underground Railroad and Harriet Tubman and stuff like that, and that's all interesting and great, but like the Underground Railroad really was a ship. I mean, most people who escaped slavery did so by dressing as a sailor and getting on a ship and getting up to like nice black communities in New England, like New Bedford, and then usually up to Canada, or often up to Canada after that. But yeah, so I think that they always saw sailors as what Marcus Rediker calls a vector of revolution. It's like, if there was going to be like something that happened, sailors were going to be in the middle of it, because they were like physical. I mean, they like had a physical job. They were usually in good shape. They had to be to like climb up in the rig and be tough and survive harsh conditions, and then they also were like a class of people. They dressed in a crazy way, and people like couldn't tell one apart from the other one, and they could leave town at any time, so they were seen as like suspicious people, but also like if you were in a jam, a person who you could count on, right? And then also, I think this is particularly the case, that like even white sailors were to a certain extent enslaved, and I don't want to overstate that, but like they were not free people. They couldn't just leave their job. And not only could they not just leave their job, but like their captains could legally restrain, jail, and physically discipline them, even kill them. And so their position at sea was like at least somewhat like the position of an enslaved person. In 2 years before the mass, Dana witnesses a flogging. They could flog you. They'd just be like, okay, you did this thing. And then they would just like hold you up like this and like hit you with this whip that had bits of bone and stuff embedded in it. And they go, So.
That's horrible.
Oh, it was horrible. I mean, it was brutal. People died from it and stuff, And so Dana witnesses that, and it's totally like unjust, if there is even a just one. And he's like, dang, that could have happened to me. Like, I could have got on the wrong side of this guy who had the power to do this to me and discipline me this way. Dana actually became a kind of lifelong advocate for sailors' rights when he became and particularly relative to like physical discipline, when he became a lawyer and stuff later on. But yeah, so there was at least the idea that that sailors would be sympathetic to the enslaved, realizing that there was somewhat of a similar social situation that they were in, and that made them ready to help someone out. Equiano gets a few times in his narrative like taken captive by people like there were people who would like go after runaway slaves, like bounty hunters, and they would sometimes not care if you were the person on the flyer or not. They would just produce a body, and so Equiano was like threatened. He was violently sort of re-enslaved at a certain point, but had been threatened with that, and other sailors would help him out. There's a scene in Frederick Douglass's narrative where these guys they're unloading a scow of stone in Baltimore, where he is, and it probably would have come from New Hampshire or Maine at the time, maybe even Massachusetts, but it would have come from New England. And they're talking to him, and they're like, "Hey," and he comes and he helps them, and they're like, "Hey, are you enslaved?" or whatever they talked about. And it's like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Are you a slave for life?" And he's like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Oh man, that's some bull," And they tell him, they're like, "Hey, if you want to run away, ask a sailor and we'll take you with us," And he kind of like, he's a kid at the time, and he kind of like pretends to not know what they're talking about and kind of deflects it, And he's like, "But I remembered it," and they were like, "That's we don't agree with that. You're like a hardworking, nice guy. We like you. We want to help you out." And like he thinks that like, "Oh wow, maybe these people are maybe closer to my social situation than I would have imagined before, and also maybe that they would have helped me, and that maybe white people are not just a monolithic group of people, and so he sort of remembers that. And then when he actually does run away, he dresses as a sailor. He doesn't say that in the first narrative. Like if we read part of his 1855 edition of the narrative, he doesn't talk about that because he doesn't want to like expose that network, But in his 1892 edition, published right before a year before his death, he says like I had seaman protection papers from a sailor named Sandy, I think, and I dressed like a sailor. Harriet Jacobs' narrative, she's like, I walked rickety like the sailor. She dressed up like a sailor and escaped in that way. So, if you think about that, like, so there were like even free black people couldn't travel around freely, right, during the era of slavery. So you'd have to have like a note, or like seaman's protection paper. And the seaman's protection papers would basically say like, this person has the right to get to this place, to get back to his ship, and so if the slave stealers would come to get you, you'd go like, I have this, and basically like it was a legal document, so that like, because black people could not enter evidence in court against white people. So like if these guys could come in court and go like, hey, he's the guy on our flyer, and he couldn't say anything about it. But if he had this seaman protection paper, they go, no, he's attached to this ship in Philadelphia, he gets to go there. So like faking that or borrowing those things became a way that people escaped enslavement and fled north.
Because the sailors, they went like North, South, Latin America, the eastern coast to West Africa and Europe. Yeah. That's kind of their main. Yeah. Where the slaves that they grabbed in, I'm assuming most of it was West Africa. Yeah. Were they like, you're one of us? Like, what are you doing? Like, do we have any idea of what their perception was?
No. And that's a fascinating question. I mean, like I said that, potentially, I think that Equiano saw the slave trade as he says that he saw the slave trade as a sailor. He was the skipper of a sloop, a small ship one time, maybe more than one time, but he said that he frequently had slaves in his possession, was the language he uses, and it's interesting because he kind of says like, but I treated him more like, this than like that, and whatever, but like he basically like acknowledges that he's in that network, But he doesn't really say what's happening. I mean, like the Amistad case, right? I don't know if I probably should know this, by the way. But I don't know if there were any enslaved sailors on the crew on the Amistad.
What's the Amistad?
Amistad's the ship that was taken over. So people were taken captive in Africa. They were being brought over to the U.S. and then they took, and it was a small schooner. So it wasn't like the you see the drawings of the slave ships with the people packed in there. It wasn't like that because it was a small schooner, and they just somehow came into possession of these enslaved people as cargo. It wasn't their main trade, I guess, so they were not as industrialized, or they didn't know how to do it as well. So they had these people, take over the ship at night, and then I guess the story was that they saw that they sailed the ship away from the sun in the morning, and they'd get them to sail it toward the sun in the morning to take them back to Africa. But then the sailors would make the ship go slow during the day when they were going toward the sun, and then at night they'd crack on sail and go the other way. So they were going like this, and they eventually came into Connecticut, and there was a trial about it, and went on and became a big kind of flashpoint in the anti-slavery movement. But the reason I'm thinking about it is that I don't know, there could have been enslaved sailors on that ship, and I don't know what their reaction to the people who took over the ship would have been. I don't know what you want to call them, the insurrectionists, I guess. I don't think that's not what I would want to call them. I'm glad they took over the ship, but yeah, it's an interesting question. But again, I think the context to remember here is that none of these people were free people with any agency. They didn't have a vote. It wasn't like a pirate ship. They didn't say like, hey, for our next cargo, do you guys want to go get rum in the West Indies, or do you want to go get enslaved people in Africa? It wasn't a democracy.
Were black sailors meted well at the ports by people? Or
no, there was a thing called the Negro Seamen's Acts in the 1830s and 40s where basically governments and people knew that they did what they did, which is they knew that they spread information, they knew that they would give a lot of times when they go ashore they would associate with, hang around with, maybe be housed by free black people in the communities, so in communities where people were enslaved there would also be free black populations, some, and so a lot of times they'd be with them, and then people are like, oh no, we don't want these people getting this information from these sailors, so we need to try to prevent it. So there was a kind of a crackdown on this. So the Negro Seamen's Act was an attempt to tax black sailors out of the labor market. So you would have to, because people didn't want them associating with their local black community, they would basically have to put them in jail and then pay to house them in the jail. So if you're a ship owner and you're well, you're already trying to get the cheapest possible labor, and partly why you might have formerly enslaved or even runaway people on your ship was because it was cheaper for you. But then all of a sudden you've got to pay all this money to have them, and then you're like, oh well, that's a hassle, we're not going to do it. And so basically it was an attempt to tax black sailors out of them and out of the maritime trades.
Who were the people lobbying for that?
I think local governments, particularly in Charleston, some of the mid-Atlantic states where there was a lot of that, where there were a lot of ships coming in, and a lot of them would have black sailors on there. And then, also as a result of some insurrections and other kinds of direct action, they just became increasingly worried about. So it's basically local governments. They were the main one was in Charleston, but and they basically a local government could impose a tax, and then you either had to avoid the port, or you had to pay the tax, or you had to show up there without, black sailors on the ship. So I think it was fairly effective in segregating the maritime trades. There was also a thing, and I don't really know the history of it that much, but there was a thing in Frederick Douglass's narrative where he was a caulker working in the shipyard, and everyone kind of seemed to get along more or less, and then somebody basically sows dissent in that situation and tries to get the white shipyard workers to turn against the black shipyard workers, and they kind of do, and that might have been the decline of black workers in the shipyards too around that time. But I don't really know the particular history of that. It's just in Frederick Douglass's narrative.
Yeah, I didn't know any of this.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, again, we have these perceptions of certain trades. I mean, like cowboy stuff. I mean, they at times and in certain areas, most cowboys were black.
Really?
Not some.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so our histories of these particular things that we think of as monolithic were not usually. So you think about cowboy culture. What do we even know about it? We know about it from literature, I guess, and it's a misrepresentation.
So kind of in the same dynamic, when I think of the relationships between men and women, I feel like the way that it is characterized is strictly power dynamic.
Yeah.
Was that true? What were those interpersonal relationships actually like? Because I think they're the same. Human nature is human nature. Now most of us get along.
What you mean? How are male-female relationships?
Yeah, do they get along, or is it strictly
in where?
Just I don't know, just society.
I don't know.
Does literature say anything about it?
Well, yeah. I mean, in our class, pretty soon we'll start talking about the women's movement and that, and there's a lot. They say a lot about it, but I don't know. I mean, I think that in literature, well, I don't know. It's interesting. There, I don't think we'll read it, but there's a novel called Ruth Hall by Fanny Fern, which is I think I talked about Fanny Fern the other day when we were talking about her being a part of Whitman's publishing of his self-publishing of Leaves of Grass. But she's got a novel called Ruth Hall that's interesting, and Ruth is married to a guy named Harry who's the perfect husband, I guess, and their relationship is sort of described as perfect, but he dies. Sorry, spoiler. But and her point is even if you had the perfect marriage, being totally dependent upon a man to live is a problem, because something could happen to him and then you're on your own, and then she goes through a series of unfortunate events basically where nobody will help her out and support her. His family thinks oh, they weren't married long enough for us to have to take care of them, even though they have kids, and they don't even take care of the kids. And then her family's well, you're married, so you should be taken care of by your husband or your husband's family, and she's kind of left in the lurch. She becomes a writer, which is kind of interesting. But and then we'll probably talk a little bit about the tradition of the domestic novel, and the domestic novel, the plot of it is basically young girl learns how to read in the right way and learns how to not act out, and then she gets rewarded by that by a perfect husband. So, but that's kind of interesting.
Did men oppose the feminist movement, the different ways of it?
Yeah, obviously. I mean, not obviously. I shouldn't say obviously, yeah. but yeah, they did. Well, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. There are a lot of male-female relationships, marriages depicted in literature, and and I think in a certain tradition they're all depicted as uncomplicatedly great, and in some areas are depicted as terrible. Depending on like the goal, the rhetorical purpose. But no, in the women's movement, I mean, we'll talk about the Seneca Falls Convention. Seneca Falls, basically, women decided to focus on anti-slavery before they focused on, on women's rights, or particularly focused on getting the vote for women. And there was almost unanimous consent because they were like, well, that, slavery is a greater evil than gender inequity, so we'll deal with that next,
The women said that, or the men said that? Or people?
The women said that,
okay.
but there were men involved, and the men may have influenced and steered that direction. Frederick Douglass was there; he may have steered that conversation in that direction. Margaret Fuller was an outlier in that. She's like, if we got the vote now, then we could just end slavery right now. Like, give women the vote, and if women are unified in their opposition to slavery, which they seemed to be, on Christian moral grounds, we'll just vote against it tomorrow. Get the vote today, vote against it tomorrow, no problem. And so, but yeah, they kind of decided to postpone their concerns for the concerns of anti-slavery. And yeah, I mean, the women's movement was opposed in a lot of ways. Yeah, sure. I mean, there were men who were involved in it, right, and men who supported it, but no, they were opposed at every turn. And men were reluctant to share political power, and they were willing to play dirty to not share it, So, and again, they were there were men involved in the movement who were loyal supporters, but by and large, men were reluctant to share political power with women unless it was advantageous for them to do so. Like in Wyoming, women had the vote in 1780 or something like that, way before they got it in 1920, because
in just state elections or federal as well? In
federal elections, because they were trying to expand their voting number, just like now. Like in Wyoming, your vote's worth more than in California. So, but yeah. But there was a whole history of it that went back and forth based on whether people thought it was more advantageous to them to include women in the vote or to exclude them in the vote. And I think the consensus was generally it's best to count them for representation but vote for them.
Yeah.
I think that ended up being the consensus.
Like the worst of both worlds.
Yeah, exactly. Let's give them the worst possible deal. Yeah, I mean women were legally dead when they were married. They couldn't own property. They were very, they had a very hard time controlling their lives, no matter how bad their husband was. They had little recourse, and so the women's movement was something that really, women were. It wasn't women were fighting for their survival, and particularly if they were unmarried or in an abusive relationship, or the reason the women's movement and the temperance movement were so closely aligned was that it was you married to some drunk who beat you up and you had no way to get out of that situation.
Temperance was the alcohol.
Yeah. And basically, after the Civil War, the women's movement somewhat fractured into the suffrage movement and the temperance movement. A lot of the same women who were part of the Second Great Awakening, motivated by Christian values and church participation to do activism, were a lot of them went more into the temperance movement than into the suffrage movement. That was another kind of dividing point in women's thing, and for good reasons. I'm not really being critical of it. A lot of the women who went in the temperance movement were well, women are facing, there's serious, real harm being done to women right now. And if we could make alcohol illegal or somehow legislate how people, used it or what they did when they were using it, then we could save some women right now, right? So I'm not really blaming them for that. I mean, at some level, I'm on the Margaret Fuller side. Just get the political power first and then use it, But I also understand why people would be like, well, no, because we, that might be a long way off. And if I believe in a harm reduction model, then we should just do will have the most immediate effect on harm reduction, right? So I'm not really trying to second guess that or be critical of that, but yeah.
Okay. What else do I have here? Is it it's interesting because I feel like it's been a very school teaches a very broad overview.
Yeah.
I think of history, and I think.
Yeah.
Well, I guess for some reason, in some way, the classes we have now are more specifically focused.
Maybe, but yeah.
But it's fun.
No, I mean you're right though. Yeah, we kind of. I don't know. We just don't devote too much time to a lot of things in school. It's and partly that's just how it is. Partly it's if you think about it, you're in school for a pretty small portion of your life, really. I mean, it doesn't seem like it when you're.
Feels like a long time, now.
I know. I mean, it's all of your life now, But and it'll be a while before it's only half of your life. You know what I mean? But still, you cover a lot of stuff. I mean, I sometimes lament that people don't have the opportunity to study more American history because I think it's important, and I think that we would I don't know. I mean, we would make better decisions if we knew who we were, a little bit better. But yeah, it's you only have so much time, and you're supposed to study all this stuff. There's an ever expanding amount of stuff that you're supposed to know in the world, I think, in school. So, yeah.
Is there a time period or series of events that you think people should know more about?
Oh, I don't know. I mean,
or topics?
I don't know. All of them, I guess. I mean, I kind of when I talk to students and stuff, I know history just as just as a reader of literature who just, I'm not a historian and I don't know all the details of this stuff either. I just have learned this stuff to try to contextualize the literary texts that I've read, and understand what's going on in them. But I am a little surprised that students don't know the sort of broad outlines of American history, I'll occasionally have a student who knows that stuff really well, and then I'll discover that she's a German exchange student, and I'm not joking. Yeah, we used to have a program, an exchange program, and then we'd have these students, and then I'd be like, wow, you really know your history, and they'll be like, yeah, I'm an exchange student. Oh, and then they'll always be like, how come the other students don't really know about this stuff? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, when my kid was in her history class, American history class, whenever it was junior year or whatever, I mean, she hardly learned anything. I mean, she'd come in and go hey, what's going on with this? And I'm like, oh, are you, this was during COVID, and I'd be like, is this on your test or whatever? And she'd be like, no, this is not. I already did the test. This is just the part we didn't talk about. And I'm like, oh. And she discovered that the sidebars in her history book were to her the most important stuff, and they never even mentioned those in the class. So she'd be like, what's going on with the, whatever, Fugitive Slave Act, and we'd talk about it. What's going on with Seneca Falls Convention? And they never talked about that stuff. So yeah, I think that that students don't really study American history that much. And yeah, I don't know what time we should best study. I mean, Yeah. I think, I think like when you're talking about like, the depth versus the breadth model of learning, right? And like, I think that like for history, the breadth model is actually good. I think that because I do think that seeing the sweep of things is good, to see like, oh, we did this, we advanced in this way, we retreated in this way, we advanced in this way, and, to see the curve of that, I think is the most important thing. And that at some level, the details are super interesting, but they might be for scholars. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So and that's a little bit weird for me to say, because I usually believe that like deep study is how you actually learn. You really learn things. I mean, like, I think, like, if you want to be a musician, like, you might be way better off to just deeply learn some small thing than have an overview of a bunch of things, because you would learn harmonic information that would then be applicable to almost everything, and you would know it deeply, because there would be skills attached with that. But I think in history, probably just like, I think just like having a big overview of things would be really useful for students.
Yeah, I went through a phase of like going through the Gilded Age.
Oh, you did? Yeah.
Yeah, Gilded Age is so fun.
It is, yeah.
What were, like, I know towards the end people kind of hated Rockefeller, and then after, I forget the name of the rebellion with Carnegie.
Yeah.
Like, they started to hate those two.
Yeah.
But like before then, and like the up and coming of the steel industry and the oil industry, and then even Vanderbilt, with railroads, did people like them? Were they like, what can they do?
Well, that's actually, I mean, I think studying the rise of the robber baron is maybe might be useful for people in American culture, right?
Because there's no like business law at that point.
Yeah.
And that's the
Well, I mean, there was a point in American culture where we decided that rich people were not making us richer, didn't have our interests in mind, and were actually just grabbing stuff for themselves, and we revolted against that idea. And we have not done that in our current moment, despite the situation being far worse than it was during the robber baron era.
Yeah. How do people revolt in that?
I think just there was public sentiment that turned way against the ultra rich, and people like Carnegie and Mellon starting foundations and doing charitable works and trying to clean up their image. Kind of like Bezos has his ads like, our employees are happy, and like you've seen these ads, like they show these like cute couple that like should be in my class. They go on a date,
Like a stock image photoshopped.
yeah, and it's like, wow, if you're taking out ads to say that you're not exploiting your laborers, then maybe you should spend that money on paying better wages or something, But no, so I think that there's public sentiment turned against them, and then people were much more in favor of like a billionaire tax or higher corporate tax structures, and I think that they started to go up, because then I think that the politicians thought they then had a mandate to actually push back against the ultra rich, and so I think that happened. There were also a series of like financial panics and stuff, and stock market crashes, like in 1907 and stuff. That
J.P. Morgan like fixed one of them.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah,
like a whole. Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, but so like I think also like people may have thought at a certain point that like, okay, these people might be crooks, but like we're gonna rise with them, and then I go, no, maybe we're not. Actually, maybe this whole thing's gonna collapse, and maybe we should like not put so much stock in their wealth as connected to our wealth, So.
Did you hear the story when Rockefeller and Standard Oil got huge? As they're kind of moving, I think in Ohio, like a little bit west of there, there was a company that was like a small startup that was trying to just like combat Standard Oil's prices.
Yeah.
And so people are all buying only their stuff because they didn't want to be a part of this monopoly.
Yeah.
Standard Oil owned it.
Oh, they did? It was fake competition?
Fake opposition. So people buy all for product.
Well, I mean, like so many businesses did that. Like when we talk about the predatory business practices now that we want to reel in, and I think we should, but like they were all kind of pioneered by these people. Like, like I talk about like Walmart. This is a generation ago, but like a Walmart of like coming into your town and then like just selling everything for nothing until the businesses go out of business.
Yeah,
and
Rockefeller
then,
did the same thing.
and then raise, right, and
just
so did,
prices.
and so did Ford, Like Ford, like the Ford N9 tractor, the little tractor that revolutionized agriculture in America. Like, it was not the most popular tractor. There was like the McCormick Deere Informal tractor and some other small tractors. There was I think Allied or Case tractor, but Ford just put them out of business by going to those areas and selling. You go to the same town and open a dealership, sell the tractor for a loss. Put those people out of business and then just reel the price back up. Recover the loss after the competition goes out of business. So like those were all kind of like standard things. But again, I think at a certain point that public sentiment turned against them, and then particularly during the Depression, people were like, okay, rich people caused it. The ultra rich caused this by driving up the stock market, and there's no real value. And so when we found out there was no real value, then we realized that rich people just basically gave us a Ponzi scheme. We put all this money that we borrowed into these stocks that they said were going to go up forever, and then they didn't, and now we're where we're at, and I feel like we just haven't reached that moment. I don't know why. I mean, we may have reached that moment in 2008 to a certain extent, but then we just forgot about it pretty quickly, So yeah, I don't know. So maybe if people studied that era, they might recognize a similar pattern and then also have a different response. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's wild because the Anti-Sherman Trust Act, which was established and ended up taking. It's funny because Standard Oil was taken out by that, but they funded the politician. Sherman, it's like a T. Sherman, whatever his name.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, they funded him all the way through.
Yeah.
And then with Vanderbilt, it's completely different, but he was taken out by these two guys in his company, and they basically just liquidated his stock and just basically inflated everything, and he had almost no equity in the company, and they were like, oh.
Interesting.
Bye.
Hostile takeover.
Yeah, no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
It's all these people who just had free will and just went, how can we get it by any means possible?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, but I mean, this is definitely right. People talk about now, whatever late stage capitalism and stuff. It's like we've been here before. We've been here before. There are ways to make, businesses accountable to people, and I wish we would have some of them, because there's not a lack of money to go around. I mean, it's just all going to the top right now, and people. But that's part of what we've talked about too, as part of this American dream ideal and whatever, and that America's going to reward the people who are virtuous. If you got all the money, you must be doing something right. You must have virtue attached to that. It's like, well, or crime.
I know we talked about the Puritans kind of having that sense of money and gifts being from God, and that's you've done something right.
Yeah.
Were there other moments that kind of put that emphasis on money, or was it just capitalism and people using? Where did that emphasis come from? Do we know?
No, I don't know. I mean, part of it, there's part of me is cynical about that, but there's also part of me that's like, well, but again, there was also part of why we believe in that is because we saw it happen, and it was predicated on people rising, economically or whatever. I mean, so part of it's like, well, okay, so, did Rockefeller, participate in a lot of predatory business practices that hurt people and killed innovation and stopped, emerging people from doing other things and prevented things like public transportation from happening? Yes, but during his rise, also people were getting jobs and having the quality of their lives improve. Right.
Yeah, and I guess at some point oil was cheap.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't a competition to.
Right.
But I guess once it gets to the point where they are the only producer of oil, then.
Yeah, well,
but
that's the thing, right? Yeah, if you buy the first Ford tractor that comes in the dealership and they're selling it at half price, then it's good. But if you buy the 20th and it's sold at double price,
Yeah.
I think that might be part of it too, though. I think part of it, like, I mean, I don't know about. I mean, I don't know. Again, I don't really know about economics, but I do think that, like, there is a thing that people. I mean, people have gotten rich in this country fast in different ways, like the oil boom,
Steel.
Steel, gold, silver, codfish, crypto, yeah, so people have gotten rich in the rise of that, and so like we kind of believe in that, but like I think there's a thing like people at a certain point realize that there's like crime going on or whatever, and they're just like, but maybe I'll get in and get out of it before, it's like there's some element of gambling that people will participate in. That might not be probably not a uniquely American thing, but there's a thing like the outcome is dictated by God or by America or by whatever larger concept you want to think, but I might also be able to like stack the deck a little bit,
Yeah.
That's the thing about also on your list, which is crazy. I don't know how these things are related, but like that's also partly the thing with dueling, right?
Yeah.
That like the outcome is dictated by God. That's what people believe. Like you think you're right, I think I'm right. God will decide
It's
by.
like, well, don't lie, shoot for it.
Exactly. Like whichever one of us is alive at the end, God will have chosen to have lived, right? And you're like, yeah, but like I also might be able to increase my odds by being a psycho, right? Or by practicing with a dueling pistol every spare moment of my life, right? And it's the same kind of thing. I think that this is a thing that people believe, like that like the virtuous will somehow like receive the gift, whatever, at the end, but also like I'm going to try to stack the deck in my favor, right? And that also like kind of like whitewashes that process, right? Because like if people in this country believe that the rich people deserve their wealth, and I think we do as a nation, then you can take shortcuts to getting rich, and then after you're rich, people will still say you deserved it, and it'll hide the trail of crimes that led to that, right?
Yeah.
So you know what I'm saying? Like if you have a story, right? This is the story. Boom, rich people deserve their wealth, okay? And it's like, so if they deserve it, they must not have done something wrong in between. So if you do something wrong in between and you end up here, then it erases the wrong in between, right? And again, I think it's the same thing with the duel. I mean, because let's be honest about this. I mean, do you really think the person who's better at shooting somebody else is more favored by God than the person who gets shot? How can that be? Like how can that be? Right? So the more psychotic person is inclined to be the better person in a duel, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, I've got work.
Yeah,
so
I mean, this is
11 o'clock.
probably like, it's 11 o'clock?
Yeah.
Dang.
Well, thank you very much. Everybody, this is Matt Brown, professor here at Chico State. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Well, thanks for this. This was fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
I did too. My sister's calling me. What does she want?
I gotta find a way to get other teachers.